we're going to find some podcasts, show you how to go out there and subscribe to podcasts where you can search for content and find all of the podcasts that are out there on the internet today. And I'll show you some free tools that allow you to do that. First of all, I'm going to point you to a great resource. It's called Wikipedia. It's a free online encyclopedia. And if you search for podcasting in Wikipedia, there's a really wonderful description and sort of it's an encyclopedia entry about the history of podcasting and what it does. So I've included the link on the handout here. I really recommend that you go and check this out. It'll answer a lot of questions that you may have, and it's a wonderful resource. And not just for podcasting, for everything. It's a really neat online resource, is the Wikipedia. I work for the Regents Online Campus Collaborative, and this is our podcasting website that we set up. And you'll see Mary and Skip here were in one of the first podcasts that we produced, actually right on the stage. We have this out there. In order to subscribe to our podcast, you'll see on the left side of the screen here that we have links directly to iTunes or directly to the files themselves. So if you want to subscribe to our ROCC podcast, all you would have to do is click on this iTunes link. We have 3 different versions of the podcast. We have a regular podcast, which is just an audio podcast. We have an enhanced podcast, which is audio along with like a slideshow. And then we also have a full video podcast. So depending on if you have a video iPod or if you just want to listen to the audio version, we give people many different options. We also give them the option to listen to view it through, to listen to it through our Windows streaming server. That's not technically a podcast, but we like to give people different options. If they don't choose to go that way, they can listen to the content like that. So that's a consideration when you're creating something that you might want to take into consideration. So I'm going to show you an example of subscribing to a podcast through our website. All you have to do is, you'll see my cursor is on the iTunes link. This is a podcast called iPod Teaching Tips. And my boss, Mr. John St. Clair, have put these teaching tips together. And I'm going to click here, and it should bring us right to iTunes. And it's going to ask me where it is, or I guess they're unable to find it, but I do have iTunes. Okay, it's asking me to launch the application. So iTunes is actually already open, so it should come to the front in just a moment. It's automatically accessing the podcast directory in iTunes, and just by clicking on that link, it took me to the ROCC podcast teaching tips. So all I have to do in order to subscribe to that podcast is click on the subscribe button right here. And it's going to just give you a dialog box asking you if you really want to subscribe to this. So yes, I do. And you'll see now it's going out on the internet and downloading the ROCC iTip website demonstration. So we'll come back to this in a second because it's going to take probably about 30 seconds to download. And you can also see the way iTunes is set up is you have a general music library, and you also have a podcast directory. And in the podcast directory is a listing of all of the podcasts that you have subscribed to. And you'll see these triangles here. If you click on the triangle, it opens up sort of a subcategory, like a nested folder. These are all the separate episodes. And the most recent podcast episode for that specific podcast is listed on the top here. So when there's new content, every time you start up iTunes, it'll go out and look to see if there's an update to that specific podcast. If there is, it'll go ahead and download it automatically. So it automates that whole process. So we're almost done downloading this first iTip, and I'm going to go ahead and play this. This is actually an enhanced podcast. I'm going to try and blow this up on the screen a little bit bigger. If you can see in the bottom window, it plays right there, or it'll also play in a separate window.
Is a service of the
we'll keep it in there for right now.
Campus Collaborative. In this podcast, we'll...
And you can see the text is kind of small here. If you view this in an iPod, it's actually pretty legible because this is a 320 by 240 pixels, and it's actually designed just for that size, and where it may look a little bit small or a little blurry on this screen. And I'm going to try again to open this up. Usually when you click on this, it'll open up in a separate screen, but I think because we're hooked up to the monitors in here, it's trying to do something different. And so that's not functioning right now. But anyways, you can see this teaching tip. It'll go through and show you how to demonstrate an interactive website. And this was kind of created in something called Snaps Pro, which is the Mac version of Camtasia Studio. So if you're familiar with Camtasia, you can take that content, you can actually use Camtasia to capture content, you can use other programs and use it to help create enhanced podcasts or do things like that. So it's really simple to subscribe. As Mary was talking about, one of her favorite podcasts is This Week in Tech, and I have already subscribed to that. And
Twit number 46, joining us today, John C. Dvorak, Alex Lindsay.
And that's, if you're familiar with Leo Laporte, he sort of runs the whole thing. He was on Tech TV back when they were on a few years ago. And a lot of technology gurus and media people are involved. It's a roundtable discussion every week about the current topics in technology. And it's kind of interesting. And
Roger Chang, David.
I bumped it on and off again. So we have also our, this is just an audio version of the full-length Teaching Online podcast. This was the one that was done here, Professor Presence. And I should mention, you hear that music, that actually music was created with a program called GarageBand, which is a tool that you can use to create your podcast. But it's also a loop, like a musical loop, I want to say loop browser, but they have royalty-free music loops of like drums, guitars, like hundreds and hundreds of different sounds, and you can put those in order and repeat them and create your own music. So it's really simple to use that, so you don't have to worry about royalties or copyrights on that. It's a lot of fun to do. So if you wanted to have some bumper music or do something that was just for your podcast to make it stand out, you can use that tool. There are other tools in the PC side as well. So in addition to, these are where the podcasts go once you subscribe to them, but if you want to see the big podcasting directory in iTunes, you can get to it by either going to the music store or when you're in the podcast area, down at the bottom, there's a podcast directory link, which will take you right to the iTunes Music Store and the podcasting page. And you'll see on here they have the latest, newest podcasts on there. If you scroll to the right, these are the top 10 podcasts that are out there right now. If you're familiar with Homestar Runner, Strong Bad now has a podcast. Jack Black, the actor, has a new movie coming out. He created a podcast to talk about that. Most of the media, New York Times, NPR, a lot of sources have podcasts out there, ESPN, MTV, they're all jumping online. So a lot of the corporate world is getting into this as well. But don't let that keep you away. Actually, this is something that anybody can do. You don't have to be a corporation or a radio station. That's the beauty of podcasting, is that anyone can create the content and distribute it through this format. Let me go down on the left side here, and I'll scroll down. You can see the different podcasting categories. So if you're interested in finding educational podcasts, you can just click on this link here. Actually, there was an icon as well. And it'll take you to a full podcast directory where you can really drill down and find the things that you'd like. You could search for them, but you can also browse the directory. So under podcasts and education, and you can even look at higher education, and it's going to populate this bottom field here with a list of all the podcasts. It takes just a moment to fill it up because there are over 1,300 educational podcasts here. Now, I should say that really you ought to think of this iTunes as a directory. Apple isn't hosting all of these podcasts. These exist out there on the internet in different spaces. If you do a podcast, you have to put it on your own website or your college's website. All they're doing here is offering a directory to find these. So if you want your podcast to show up on iTunes, you have to submit it to iTunes in order for it to show up in the directory. It's kind of like Google for podcasts, but it's just specifically for those only. So for instance, I'm going to show you on here for the ROCC podcasts. I'll scroll down and I think I just passed them. Yeah, ITAP's Teaching Online. And actually the Vol State ones are down here as well, I'm pretty sure. Is that right, Mary? They, well, anyways, you can search, yeah, Volunteer State Podcasting. So let's take this and subscribe to it. You find it, and you can just double-click on it, and it'll give you a preview of what the podcast is.
Going back into the classroom, I was different for my...
And to get to that page, you click on this little arrow, and it'll bring up the Vol State podcasting page for VSCC Distance Ed. And if you want to subscribe to that, click on subscribe, verify it, and I've subscribed to a new podcast. So this is the Vol State podcasting channel right now, and I know they have a lot more in the works. And if you have a class, you can create your own separate channel like this. It's free. You just have to submit that the link exists out there to Apple. They just make sure it's nothing that's explicit or anything that's too crazy. But they really don't check for they don't editorialize, check for editorial content. They just want to be a directory service as far as the iTunes Music Store podcasting directory goes. So that's all it took right there. I guess because I'm on the Vol State Network, it downloaded like that. So let me go ahead and start to play that. I think it already did start to play some.
Going back into the classroom, I was different for my on-ground version, and I
there's
think I
Mary
was
again.
a better
And
man for it. I think
It's really quick to do. And that's another thing to think about. If your students are on campus and have their laptops hooked up to this network and you're subscribing to a podcast, it's going to be a lot faster for them to download because you're on the same internal network. So that's another consideration that I hadn't thought about, but actually is very helpful. Now, iTunes itself is a great resource, but it's not the only resource out there. It works on both PCs and Macs, but there are some websites out there I'm going to show you that that are also podcast directory services. The first one is called Odeo, and Odeo allows you to do a lot of things, but it allows you to subscribe to different podcasts as well. So here you can see I've subscribed to a podcast called Inside the Net. There's a BBC documentary podcast, and every time there's a new episode, it shows up in this list here. This is a free service. If you go to odeo.com, you can sign up for an account and use that as a directory service as well. It's just another alternative to go out there and find things. You can, when you make an account here, you actually get your own podcasting channel. So this is my audio inbox where I've subscribed to podcasts that I'm showing you, but you can look at the subscriptions button and you can see, okay, I've subscribed to 3 different podcasts here, the BBC Documentary Archive, Inside the Net, and there was a Harvard podcast that looked interesting to me, but I don't think I've even listened to it yet. You can browse the top 40 podcasts according to Odeo or Staff Picks. This Week in Tech, I guess, is number 1. This site is a little bit more tech-oriented, but it's pretty easy to use. You can also use Odeo to create some podcasts. That's going to be in our next segment, so I'll come back to that later. Some of you have a Yahoo email account. You have an account with Yahoo. Yahoo has their own podcasting section now. And I haven't spent a lot of time with Yahoo because I spend a lot of time with iTunes and Odeo, and there's only so much time in the day, as you all know. But Yahoo is now getting into podcasting, and you can listen to and subscribe to podcasts through Yahoo as well. There are lots of different companies out there jumping on the bandwagon and getting into this. So those are a few of the different ways that you can find podcasts out there and subscribe to them.